Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the last session of the day. The observation among you will have noticed that I'm not Owen Reedy, who was originally down to moderate this session. My name's Joe Simpson, and I lead the research at a company called Car Design Research. It's actually no relation to Car Design News. And some of you may know me. We're a design strategy firm working with OEMs, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of you. I've also worked with Owen, Abel, and the Car Design News team for some time. This panel is about creating new experiences in a technological age. And this morning, we heard Gordon Wagner of Mercedes-Benz say that the car has the potential to change more in the next 10 to 15 years than it has perhaps in the past 100. We also heard Adrian van Hooydonk add that his interaction design department has been the fastest growing of all the departments he manages in the past few years. So we live in this fast-changing digital space, which feels like it's moving perhaps from a product base to an experience base. So what impact is this going to have on the car and us as car designers? Hopefully, to shed a little bit of light on that, we've got three speakers here. We've got Paul Schneider from CCS, Gustavo Guerra from Volvo Group, and Ken Okuyama, who needs no introduction, I think, in Japan, from Ken Okuyama Design.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just first, thanks to the organizers for the opportunity. Very good to be here. Oops, we started in the end. Can you guys restart the presentation, please? It's in the last slide. Should I go up there? Okay. Nope. Do I get the time back?
If you pay.
All right, there you go. Right. Yes, very good. So, first start by highlighting that I have nothing to do with Volvo cars, right? So Volvo Group is the heavy transportation part of it. So we deal with trucks, buses, construction equipment, and it's not only for the Volvo brand. We have 13 brands in the portfolio. And I'm going to try to spin off a little bit of the issues that we're having with B2B environment in here, rather than only cars. Yeah. So the theme is creating new experience in a technological age. So I was trying to figure out what that means, because if you go back to 100 years ago in the Industrial Revolution, they would claim that that's the technological age, right? That was the mechanical technological age, and now we're in the digital one. So it depends on who you ask and when you are. It's always going to be the technological age. So maybe that is not particularly the issue. But just to point out, I just went back and looking at some examples. Who remembers the HP 150? Probably nobody, right? Supposedly, according to Wikipedia, the first mass-produced touchscreen computer back in 1983. Did it catch up? Not at all. It didn't sell at all. And why was that? People was just making the move between typewriters to computers. And within that move to go to the keyboard, now they also have to deal with a touch screen. What is it? How do I interact with that? So it was too much for people to catch in, right? Some manufacturers caught up with that technology quite quick. Again, according to Wikipedia, the first mass-produced touchscreen interior was the Buick Riviera in '86, right? And reading back, nobody had a complaint with the technology at all, because you can always claim that the reason why technology didn't catch was that it was not mature enough. But the technology per se was good in here. The point was maybe how it was introduced. Maybe it was a bit too early for it, and maybe it was not the right customer base. Maybe the Buick guys in the 80s are not the ones that want to deal with high-end technology at that point, right? So from '86, it takes 21 years with, of course, increment of the technology and use of touchscreen ATMs and things like that. So the technology didn't disappear, but it took 20 years for it to be really integrated in a manner that people have no fear of using. So it's not only a technology that is plugged into a product, but everything is designed together as one unit, right? And once that is done, the technology is incorporated and people buy into it. And 5 years later, then you have what you can claim is the real digital interior, which now most cars have a touchscreen, but if you remember 90s, early 2000s, there was always a discussion, do you get enough feedback in the interior with touchscreen and so on? But after the iPhone, that doesn't really matter, right? So what you have is if most of you have seen that, the adoption curve. You have that tipping point in there where the technology is no longer just a niche item, but people really adopt it as part of their daily life. And there is different theories about the adoption curve, but that tipping point in there, they're called adoption gap, is about the experience. Is how you integrate a technology into an experience that people then don't think about the technology anymore. They think about the benefits that it brings to you, right? So it's not about creating new experience in a technological age, but it's creating experience by disruptive technology, what Paul mentioned here before. It's when you bring something that really changes the arena that you need to care about, because technology is always going to be there. Then just some examples that are closer to home. There is closer to the B2B environment in here that I'm in. You have the examples with the Amazon drone, right? And it's extremely effective from a logistic point of view. Nobody's in the middleman in the process, and that drone just shows up in your house and drop the box, right? That's great. That's a really good technology. But how are people relating to that experience of you opening the door, you having that face and signing the paper, and they're actually receiving your box? Is it fun now to just seeing that thing flying around in your garden and drop a box, maybe on top of your kid's head when they're playing? I don't know. The Swedish Post, actually, Swedish Post, the PostNord, it's called. They actually made fun of it in a TV commercial. So they have reinvented their brand, and they're making fun of a helicopter coming in and dropping the box in your garden. And this American guy is saying, "Oh, the way that you deliver post is too boring. This is how you do it." And the person is just looking at it, is like, but this is just gimmick. It's not adding any value to the customer in the end. It adds a lot to the company that is delivering, but to the customer itself, it's not adding an experience, right? And there is other ways the logistic companies are trying to manage with this kind of post box. That you actually receive everything in the box. You just go, you receive a cell phone message with a code. You go in there and you pick it up, and you can choose where it's going to be delivered anywhere in town. And SF, this is a Chinese logistic company. They're even going further. They're making a store out of it. So not only you receive your post, but once you go there, you have all these accessories that you can buy because you have to visit the post anyway. So how our products could relate to it? What will be a truck in the future, right? Maybe the truck would become that post box now, that it drives in autonomously maybe, or with someone that is hired by the post company, and you have that box, and it goes around town. You don't need to have that stiff standing alone box sitting in different places. It goes around town and sits there for a day. Next day is in the next district, or so on. How this is going to change the way of logistics being distributed into city centers. Now you can have the whole warehouse inside a shopping mall, and the customers go straight into that. That's different ways to look how people are going to interact with things. If you look at other part of our business, construction equipment, for example, you bring automation, you bring autonomous technology into it. You've got to completely change the way that the construction sites and quarries are driven. First of all, it's a big safety hazard, right? People are sitting in these big machines. interacting with explosions and so on. So you can now sit someone off-site or having a manager controlling everything via remote control. And how you redesign the products after that then? What kind of interaction does the user have with these products? Because you need to remember that the user is not the buyer, right? The guy buying a big loader or an excavator sometimes doesn't even have primary education. So how do you make that relationship with the product itself? One interim technology that you could look at for trucks, for example, is platooning, where would be the first step of automation that Volvo has been working for a while, where the trucks can couple in together and you have a limited space in between them, improves aerodynamic and all of that, but then the driver doesn't need to do anything during that mode, right? So if you have a leading truck, why do you need drivers in the trucks in the back? Maybe now you can have only trailers going around and stopping in like I have a truck stop today. You just have trailer stops, and other people come and interact with your goods. Because I think the most important thing that we have, and the difference between what car industry is discussing when we're talking about autonomous, is that you have drivers and passengers in the car, and once you go autonomous, everybody's a passenger, but you still have the passenger. When you're talking about moving goods, when you no longer have the driver, maybe you have nothing, because we're transporting goods. Goods are our passengers. So maybe there is no semi-autonomous mode in here in between. When you go autonomous, you completely divest the human interaction. If you need someone inside the truck, what is that person doing then during the whole process? What is that guy going to be interacting with? Does it become a logistic manager instead? Does it work, instead of having a desk in an office somewhere, you're actually controlling a whole logistics system sitting in a truck, because there's nothing else for him to do in there. How do you change the culture on a trucker in this context? So it's a different kind of issues or challenges that we have comparing from the automotive industry, because it might come a point that you have nothing or nobody inside the vehicle. You're never going to have a car with nobody inside, because otherwise you don't need a car. It becomes a truck, right? But this semi-autonomous setup in here is going to be the enabler for us to eventually come to a point like this, where you actually have a logistics manager sitting somewhere in town, and you have trucks going all over the state or all over the country, and you're just controlling that via screen. But how is society going to accept that? Because trucks per se is not necessarily the most trustworthy vehicle in the road, right? You're driving a highway and you see that big rig coming behind you. It's quite scary. It could be quite scary. So now that you know there is nobody controlling it, do you trust it? Are you going to, if you see the word Volvo in the front of the truck, do you trust more? Because you know that that brand brings some kind of equity in that arena. So how do you enable the environment, the industry, to come to this point, right? Because as you saw in the touch screen there, and you have several examples, if you don't introduce it right, it might take a whole generation for it to bring back. You might lose a whole set of users because the society was not ready or technology was ready. So the important message that I wanted to give with this is that for you to introduce this disruptive technology that will change the environment where the product is around, what you need to do is build trust in the system. So people need to be comfortable using it. So people don't care about the technology behind it, but they are more interested on the benefit that it's going to bring to you, right? So that is my message for today. Yeah. Thank you very much.
What we're going to do now is have a short discussion between the panel, and then I'm going to open the floor up to questions, and hopefully have a bit more of a future sort of thinking conversation, given this is the last panel of the day. It strikes me, listening to your different presentations, there are kind of two factors that really come out of it for me. One is about the concept of disruption, And I think your talk, Ken, really sort of was interesting to see how designers could think differently and look at disruption. And I'm sitting here thinking, most people in this room working for auto OEMs, it feels like we're sat waiting to see what Apple might do in our space. And there's a phrase that someone once said, when Apple innovate in your space, it tends to not work out well for you. So the question I had was, as designers, how do we respond to disruptive influences?
Well, I think the idea is not to respond, but to be the disruptor. But as was mentioned earlier, it's a daunting challenge for a place like an industry like the automotive sector, and then cities like Detroit that are built around this tradition of the last 100 years that are, you know, kind of based on a business model where you own the vehicle. You go out and you buy a vehicle. And so, you know, there's a certain amount of sensing that we need to do. The technology is out there. We know it's being developed. And I think the idea is to jump ahead, leapfrog, if possible. I mean, the real challenge is most of the OEMs aren't sitting on $50 billion of capital to spend. So, but that being said, Wall Street already considers the car parked in your garage a negative asset. So you have to weigh the risk against the risk of not doing anything, as Tim mentioned.
I think the difference in here is on the disruptive technologies, the speed, actually. When you talk about Silicon Valley kind of technology, they can innovate every 6 months and come up with a complete new user experience on the phone or website service, whatever it is. And the automotive industry in general, it's, as Paul mentioned, is sitting in this big manufacturing system that, yes, you can follow this software development, but you cannot renovate your whole manufacturing system at the same time. So it's how do you partner with these companies, and how do you make sure that you bring value from it to the business that you are. When you look at the B2B environment, that take an example of a truck. You can, if you buy a Volvo truck today, you can have 10,000 different configurations of it, depending on which kind of application you're using. So how do you make it easier for the buyer to come and actually choose the right truck and have the best experience of it throughout the whole life cycle? Because that truck is going to last for maybe 20 years. And 20 years ago, someone that bought a FH truck 20 years ago didn't have a smartphone. Now they do. So do they have to sell that truck and buy a new one? Probably, hopefully. But how do you enable your product to actually follow this innovation and at the same time be disruptive in the industry that you are? The challenge is not to try to copy them, because I don't think we can have the speed that this kind of technology companies have. But it's to pick the important battles to bring value to the company.
My cut for that might be that we, for example, tend to think that centralization speeds up the decision making and the react to the market requests and so on, that we have been kind of auto industry. It's been doing that, but actually what's happening is technology is advancing so fast and the market is moving so fast that you have to assume that they're always ahead of us. They're always moving faster than you are changing. So that constant change is a necessity, is now more than ever. And what's important was, I was looking at the, I was one of the board member for Yanmar. It's a company called Yanmar based in Osaka, and I am. And when we talk about the new structure for the company, when you compare the picture of Gulf War, when the George W. Bush was actually center of the table and all the generals are surrounding him and making the central, decision and sending down the message to the front line. But front line, that time it was clear who was the enemy and who's not. Now, after 9/11, in fact, the world changed, and the world is even the war is changing faster than you send the command to soldiers. So I was looking at a picture the other day that it's like people watching a CNN big, the screens, and there are counselors and the professionals, but Obama was actually just sitting here. He doesn't even have his chair because you do the briefing is very important. So people share vision, people share the objectives, and people share the willingness to actually do certain activities. But after that, beyond that, each decision has to be made by front runners, the front lines, that you just simply watch with the cameras and the ear set. So whatever you have to make that quick decision, that moment that you send the message to, otherwise you just simply watch. It's almost like what we do now. A lot of business decisions are not done by the CEO level. In fact, it's done by mostly frontline people. So that's how decision making, for example, changes with the technology, and because of that, not just the internet, IoT, and that, but the market is moving faster. So you have to assume that we're always behind. You're not going to be able to actually get ahead of them at all. Well, that's my assumption, and it's not an answer to your question, but I just took a different cut to.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I guess one of the responses I have to that is what you're saying, that as designers we can actually have a really huge role here. Although we need management and CEO buy-in, we can perhaps have a bigger impact than we sometimes think we can.
Can I go ahead? By having the kind of a hierarchy in a society, in a structure, actually, I said that makes the decision making slow, right? In fact, structure-wise too. So what's important is when you talk to a lot of people, like my mom, people think that designers will fight against the financial people and engineers. In fact, we don't fight. In fact, we coordinate things. She said, is that so? Yeah, we do, because there are a lot of conflicting elements within engineering, for example, within financial issues. And they don't realize that there's this conflict until they come to visualize with a mock-up of certain solutions that happens to be design studio. So designers nowadays play as very much like a coordinator, or sometimes, or many times, actually forced to make decisions for those people. In fact, the professionals who are work in a very professional divided industry tends to look at very micro issues, not so much of the macro. And the designers forced or expected to think in terms of more of a macro issue, which is our strength, I think. I'm sure you do that.
Yeah. I think building up on that, something that was mentioned before, is that with the speed of new technologies, what you want to avoid is to have your products, this highly complex products, there is transportation in general, to become commodities, right? Because once you do that, your margins go down and you suddenly cannot afford the development anymore. So it's how coordinating all this development of technology with other companies to make sure that you're bringing value to it. So there is still a vehicle industry around us, right?
Yeah, I think the idea of vehicles turning into a commodity is a big danger for a lot of the volume brands. So, but the signposts have already been revealed. We've been talking about experience quite a bit. The experience of the customer, the experience of the brand promise, and the experience that follows from that promise. But we're talking less about the object, so I think, or the artifact that is the vehicle. So I think that the future of value creation is really much more about that experience, and if we could monetize that without, closing down the businesses that we're so familiar with, and then we move forward with a healthy business model.
What do each of you feel that experience should be, and what can the existing car brands bring? Because in one sense, you talk about, and we all talk about, autonomous travel, and if you look at what Uber are moving towards, everyone feels that once autonomous cars are reality, you'll lose the driver. When we potentially own our own autonomous cars, you said, Gustavo, we'll all be passengers. And the vision, to an extent, that we're painted at the moment is that we're just going to either be working in them or we're going to be being fed information, a little bit like, you know, we consume information, data, stuff when we're on our iPads. Should we be thinking bigger than that, you think?
I think that comes back to the last message that I put in there, build trust, because yes, autonomous technology is fully viable now. Everybody has seen the tests with Tesla now that came out and all. Great. Legislation is not fully prepared for it yet. Society might not. It's basically all the geeks are testing it now, right? It's the early adopters and they're seeing, oh, this is very cool. All it takes really is for one of these cars to be losing the readability on a sensor or something, and unfortunately kill 10 school kids that are crossing the road, and suddenly the technology is banned, right? And then you're going to take another 20 years for it to come back because people don't want that risk to come anymore. So it's how you build the trust in the system to make sure the technology is going to be there. So all this talk with Uber and becoming autonomous and you disappear with all the drivers, it's an assumption that will not become reality if we not enable that, right? And the way to enable that for you as a company is to get value from it. So you can create an experience that will benefit your company. So that's what you need to look at without being afraid of the technology per se.
I think the other way to look at it, and I think that image that I used from IDEO is probably a really good one to consider. It's basically a room on wheels. So what do we do at home? I mean, we make choices to either take in more information, whether that's your iPad or read a book. But again, in making those choices, we make those choices because we have the freedom to do that. So what you're really giving the customer is time. And as you saw on the chart with the 3 different stages towards full autonomy, part of the cost factored into the current cost of travel per mile is the time that you're, if you're in traffic, you're wasting time, certainly, if you're not enjoying yourself. So we're providing time, I think. And then in addition to that, the idea of a current OEM with multiple brands, like FCA, for example, to offer the whole portfolio on demand, much like Uber with an app. Just, today I want a Fiat, tomorrow I need a minivan. I think that that allows for quite a bit of variety and quite a bit of flexibility, which is another thing that we always talk about providing to the customer without the customer having to make a commitment to one vehicle. He can make a commitment to a brand, and that experience through using that app, the convenience of having a full selection of vehicles. So I think it's time and flexibility is what we're really providing with this technology.
Ken, do you want to add?
Yeah, something that Paul mentioned too. We tend to think that we divide the whole world into commodity or brand products, but actually there's something in between too. And I don't think we have to fear about the automobiles becoming a commodity, because first of all, cars will never become the actual price of commodity products, and it'll always be the second biggest the purchase in life after buying a house. I like the term premium commodity. For example, if you're willing to maybe pay 30% of premium, you can get the commodity, but there's something a little different. The reason why we buy these products with the little fruits